Good evening. Good evening, good evening. Hi, friends online. Hi, friends in the room. Sorry for being late. I'm in this kind of timeless time with my dad. Some of you know that it's a really precious moment to be with someone. And I go over there, and it's really like everything is so slow. Such a kind of beautiful reminder of taking time and just slowing down and being with what's there. And then being in a rush all the way here is a good compliment. Tonight, I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation from 2 weeks ago on the not inconsequential topic of self and the way that Tsoknyi Rinpoche describes that as these different versions of I. This mere I, or this very simple version of I, or who I think I am. And then this version that he calls a more solid I, when we start kind of identifying, especially with the body and form. And then our self-cherishing I, or our precious I, the I that we create and then we furiously try to protect from the world. It's often this idealized view of who we are, kind of neatly stacked on top of the worst view of who we hope we aren't, that we don't want anyone to see. And the reason this is so important, looking at these layers and versions of how we create this identification with self, this kind of more solid view of who we are, is because it really interrupts our meditation practice. It really interrupts our compassion. It really interrupts our ability to feel our natural ground of being as loving, spacious awareness. And so the practices tonight, or the teachings tonight, kind of following up on those versions of looking at I, and I'll revisit it a bit more, is understanding, what are the processes of peeling back the layers that create that solid, kind of precious sense of self. And maybe, needless to say, we need some method to do it. Just an idea of, I want to stop this, holding on to who I am. It isn't serving me. It's in the way. It's not even real. It's some, version of my third grade teacher, my mom, society, like whatever, right? Created this idea of who we think we should be or who we are. But we need a method to kind of pull it back, to pull back those layers. And the next couple chapters in this beautiful book are working us through the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And I love approaching these simple foundational practices. I'm sure many of you in the room have done some version of at least one of these foundations, if not once, maybe even for years or decades. But to really look at the purpose of these practices as loosening the confines of thinking we know who we are and trying to project that through the world, it gives them a different energy, a different purpose. And then there's two ways that Tsoknyi describes the purpose of these mindfulness practices, and I want to share with you all. He said, the ultimate goal of mindfulness is to free all living creatures from their patterns in order to experience the openness, wisdom, and warmth that is the essence of our being and the essence of bodhicitta. In order to do that, we have to experience that freedom for ourselves. So this idea that, with these mindfulness practices, it's not just the alleviation of stress and distress and difficulty, which is wonderful. It's like a byproduct. But that there is this underlying goal. And then another way he describes this here. Yeah, this chapter is quite rich. pretty amazing the difference between all the raucous connection that people were having and this beautiful silence. Thank you for that. It's really nice. Oh yeah, it's on 112. He said one of the most effective methods is mindfulness in order to loosen this attachment to an idea of who we are. It's a set of practices designed to assist us in uncovering or unfreezing these various layers or confines of I that prevent us from experiencing the basic spark that lies at the heart of our being. So, as some of you who've been coming to other sessions know, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, the teacher who wrote this text, we're following along, he calls the basic fundamental nature of our being, this essence love, this basic goodness, and that spark is always right there. So we've done a couple sessions here together of just trying to feel that spark, just kind of, is it here? And this evening, we'll do a brief guided tour of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And with that kind of questioning of, is there an I here? Is there something solid? So using this tool, like almost using mindfulness like a chisel to kind of poke our way through to that essence, that love, that goodness. So we start with the mindfulness of the body, and noticing sensation just as it is. And then noticing the attributions or the projections we put onto it, our feelings. Noticing I experience my right knee as kind of unpleasant, but is there just a way that can be shifting and changing? One of the ways we start to unravel or loosen these ideas of I is by seeing the temporary nature of experience, shifting and changing. And then we apply that lens to our own thoughts, right? That most of us really believe what we think, which is totally crazy, because often those thoughts are just, reruns and old stories and projections that, minutes or hours later, we barely even remember, don't seem relevant anymore. So we'll be looking at kind of those thoughts and doing that practice of metacognition and meta-awareness to see that impermanent, ever-changing nature of thoughts and the way it colors our experience. And then giving ourselves a moment to kind of feel the interplay or the dance, that all the causes and conditions that we experience through this body and through mind, to see it and no longer feel so held by it, and maybe touch into that feeling of a greater, more spacious awareness. So that's our tour. You guys ready for that kind of tour? I think it's worth a try. I had a airline flight recently, and I had 30 minutes to watch a movie because I was catching up on work, and I decided to watch Jurassic Park, the original. You guys, it totally kind of stands the test of time, at least the first 30 minutes. So I like to think of, as we engage in practice, it is like we're going on a tour of the most frightening and exciting Paleolithic monsters that are in our own mind, right? And so we can kind of like feel that level of like, whew, this is going to be an interesting tour. Luckily, we're going to do much better than the Jurassic Park movie. We actually have a functioning set of tools that will help guide us through. But that kind of energy, that idea, one of my dear beloved teachers, Alan Wallace, would say, it's not that we're going on retreat, we're going on an expedition of the mind, right? So thinking even of this practice like an expedition into our mind. So with that, first of all, also welcome everyone, especially if it's your first time. Oh, okay. And if it's your first time here, welcome. If you've been here many times, so wonderful to have you back. I'm Eve. This is the San Francisco Dharma Collective, and we're so fortunate. This is an entirely volunteer-run community. So all of us here welcome you. We all are welcoming. You all are welcoming. Yay, you made it. Come on in. raise your hand if there's a seat empty next to you. All right. So let's take a moment and find a posture that feels supportive. And how about together we begin by giving ourselves this kind of embodied sense of settling in by inhaling the shoulders up to the ears and then exhale, rolling back. Yeah, opening the chest, inhaling up and exhaling. One more time together. And imagine with that exhale, just shaking off, letting go, releasing anything you needed to do on your way to get here. And maybe even inviting the possibility that whatever needs to happen when you leave will be there at the end of practice. And feeling into the inspiration that brought you here tonight. Considering the generosity of letting ourselves fully show up for this practice. With some intention and care, let's continue settling in by softening through the face, softening around the eyes and the cheekbones. And softening the jaw. Continue this softening, regathering the attention whenever it strays, and finding ourselves reconnected right here to softening through the chest. In whatever way feels comfortable and supportive, keep softening through the chest. And feel, sense, or imagine that we can allow the softening in the belly to also feel like a landing, a firm ground. So feeling that stability, base of the mountain at the belly. And traveling back up and inviting whatever else wants to be softened at the heart to soften again. One more time, softening, relaxing, melting throughout the entire face, especially around the eyes and the jaw. Feel, sense, or imagine softening through the crown, inviting a sense of real uprightness from the base to the crown. To continue settling and giving our mind a place to rest, let's follow the breath, feeling, sensing, or imagining the breath coming up the central channel. So breathing up through the spine from the very base to the crown. And then exhaling and releasing from the crown to the base. Maybe you feel this, the breath traveling up as a sense of energy or light. Maybe you sense it, you recognize the breath without being able to experience it in a tactile way. Or you simply imagine the breath traveling up, traveling back down. The mind will wander, distractions will arise. No problem. For just a little bit longer, we will continue to return again and again to following the breath. Feel, sense, or imagine the breath traveling up from the base to the crown, and traveling back down from the crown to the base. And we shift more deliberately now, opening the aperture, bringing our mindfulness, our awareness and attention to the entire field of tactile sensation in the body. So with this very simple and bare attention, noticing the sensations throughout the body just as they are. Maybe we notice something like an itch or an ache, maybe simply a movement of energy, warmth. As much as possible, experiencing and noticing without concept, even without preference or grasping, without needing to know why the ache is there or where it's even coming from. Just a mindfulness of sensation in the body. Each time we're carried away, that's the very seed of our practice. The opportunity to strengthen and grow our mindfulness by returning. And returning not with this sense of I did it wrong, but returning with a renewed enthusiasm back on the expedition. Noticing these qualities of sensation throughout the body, maybe even a sense of the entire body as field of sensation. Fresh, curious, warm attention to whatever is here in the body. No agenda, without any expectation. Loosening our identification with this as my body, my feelings. Just noticing feelings, sensations. And then gently shifting a bit to notice not just the feelings and sensations, but also noticing that gentle way that we apply a preference, liking, not liking. So in the mindfulness of feelings, we may notice a sense of pleasantness when there's warmth or openness. We may have a sense of unpleasantness with an ache or an itch. So just very simply, without a lot of elaboration, noticing these feelings. We may begin to see as we keep our focus close to the body and the breath that there are moments where there's no feeling of pleasant or unpleasant, just a feeling of neutral, a kind of familiarity. And sensations and feelings in the body are often moving, shifting, changing. So if we keep our attention and awareness very precise, we can notice these shifts and changes, some of which we enjoy, some of which we don't like. And again, also being able to notice these aspects of sensation that are simply neutral. We take a moment here and consider, are these shifting sensations in the body and our preferences about them, does that make up who we are? Is that the entirety of our experience? Maybe we notice that these are always changing and shifting. And we shift now to noticing, bringing mindfulness to thoughts. This is a delicate practice. We are not mindfulness of thinking, but mindfulness in which we recognize thoughts arising and we do not energize. We let them pass through, just like sensations arising and passing away. So invite a softening again through the face, the chest, and the belly. A sense almost of leaning back in the mind. And allowing thoughts and memories and images to arise without becoming involved. Resting in the stillness of our awareness amid the movement of thoughts. This stillness of awareness like the sky or like the ocean, and the thoughts like clouds or waves. Maybe there are many waves, big ocean, no problem. We just keep relaxing and making space and relaxing and making space. And if we get carried away, again, no problem. Just returning. How amazing this expedition of mind. Glimpses of awareness, so much material moving through, sometimes rapidly, sometimes slow. Some thoughts that arrive with emotion, others just content, images. And just a bit longer, engaging in this practice of mindfulness of the mind, of thoughts arising, maybe even shifting, passing away. And very gently seeing if we can find more of our attention with awareness, less with the thoughts. Can we rest our mind in awareness? Thoughts still arising, but actually more of our experience just resting in a spacious, open awareness. If this feels confusing or hard, no problem. You can come back to focusing on the body, breath, sensations. If this feels a bit groundless, great, no problem, relax. Keep opening. Without forcing anything, consider the possibility that that spark of goodness, that essence love, is always already right here, inseparable from spacious awareness. Feel, sense, or imagine loving awareness. Awareness permeated with bodhicitta. Holding this very lightly, consider the inquiries. There a you that is here in spacious, loving awareness. Is there something that feels like me or mine in loving, spacious awareness? Maybe we have a glimpse or a sip of something that is not me or mine, while still being so personal, so close. Not confined just to this body, this story, this identity. Gently, gently regathering attention and awareness to the body and the breath. Feeling the body here, in this room, or online, in your own space. Feeling the connection of beings in this moment. And breathing in, really dwelling in the breath, the mindfulness of this moment. And breathing out, feeling this beautiful moment. And whether the practice felt beautiful or hard or somewhere in between, when the bell rings, can you maintain some sense of presence, openness, even as we regather together? Thank you for your practice. So here at the Dharma Collective, we're very fortunate that we have an opportunity not just to practice together, but also to reflect together, an opportunity to share our experience and ask questions. And I feel very passionate about the value of this, not just because of the beautiful lineage that this is drawn from, not just because of the scientific evidence that we learn through reflection, but just the richness that I hear in this community when folks share their experience and questions. And in order to do so, every Wednesday evening, we reconstellate a community together, and one that feels supportive. And we really treat this time of reflection and discussion as part of the practice. So when we're listening, we're really listening through ears of compassion. And when we're speaking, we're really speaking from compassion. So that means, as much as possible, bringing that sense of care, that sense of openness when we are listening to what others are saying. And as we probably experienced in the practice, it's so hard to slow down and just experience what's happening. And of course, someone is speaking, it could be easy for us to have some sort of projection or idea. But let's bring this mindfulness, this bare attention, just to our listening. And as we are sharing here, also being really considerate of other beings in this room and how we share and what we share. It's a pretty wild world out there these days. So creating these spaces where we can feel some sense of connection and comfort is just invaluable. So what do you think? Can we do that together? Yeah? Hands up, yes, yay. Okay, great. Friends online, virtually so, thank you. Okay, great. So for folks in the room, we have this mic so that our friends online can hear. And for friends online, feel free to raise a hand. Any questions or reflections on that practice? What did you notice? What arose? Yeah, Gage.
This was really challenging for me. And I thought I was going to sail through it because I meditated earlier today and I was like, oh, I'm prepped and ready. But this was really challenging. The body sensation
Yeah.
was really hard for me. I haven't done that in a while and I was hot. And my hair was itching in my shirt.
Perfect.
And I just wanted it to stop.
Yeah.
And it just kept cycling. I mean, it did shift and change.
Yeah.
Came, I mean, like 3 times it like went and came back. But,
Yeah.
I got through it, and I think I was quiet most of the time. And still, and so yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah.
And the awareness was really nice, and I did notice as soon as you asked the question, like, do you feel a sense of me and spacious awareness? The answer was really clearly no.
Yeah.
Immediately, and then you kind of lose contact with that over
Right.
the time. But at least I felt like a real first hit of it.
Yeah.
There wasn't much of one.
And isn't it awkward to be in a human body? You know, I think some of this practice, we get that, you know, because we could sit here and chat all night and not really even notice, maybe, you know, we distract enough. But when we pay attention, you know, like that sense of discomfort, it's so palpable. And, you know, even just being warm and having like your hair, right? Like it's not even, right, other bigger physical ailments. So just a real compassion to ourselves in that too, I think is beautiful. That like, God, this is uncomfortable having a body. And it's interesting because the mindfulness of sensation, you know, mindfulness of the body, so much of that work when its early foundations, taught by John Kabat-Zinn and then hundreds of thousands, if not millions of others, of bringing attention and awareness to sensations even when they're painful. And that can actually be a way to alleviate pain, because you can see like, oh, this is just hair and heat. And then I'm kind of making the thing hard, right? And we didn't go into that in this practice, but it actually is kind of wonderful to be slightly uncomfortable. And we almost always are. Very rare to just be like, no problem. Everything, you know, like not gonna happen. Either with the body or with someone else, like that dog. I never heard a dog on the street before, and I was like, okay, you know, or whatever else. And then again, kind of seeing the overlay. So, thanks, Cage.
Yeah, I had the same experience, I think the sensation of the body was really strong. At one point, like my leg is screaming, and I've never experienced like the scar can talk. And when you cued, can you experience the bodhicitta in the spacious awareness? I was trying to go there, and I think I had a contact of that, but almost like I landed in my body earlier than your guidance. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm like, let me bring the awareness into my affected area.
Yeah.
And that really helped. So the last portion is just being very grounding.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And, I think it is interesting, discomfort in the body, especially when we're healing from injury, and we have such a story, like something's wrong. We can feel it, and we've had oh God, it's coming back, right? And so nice to bring that kind of gentleness to it. Thank you. Other questions, reflections? Yes, please.
I guess I have a question. So, my body was like really still and I felt really calm. Does this even work? I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
it doesn't amplify. But
Oh, that
those
makes
folks
sense.
online
Okay.
can't
I was
hear.
like, what's the point of this? Okay. So my body felt really calm, but my thoughts kept running and running. And I would try to do like a technique of like noting it and then moving on. But it's like oftentimes just throughout my day, I'm heavy on the mind. And so I guess you were talking before about like disidentification, and like not detaching from the I, but the different types of I.
Yeah.
And I guess if you have any like thoughts or advice or reflections about being able to detach from the I thoughts, because they feel, and then it's like, well, if it's not me, then who's having the thought?
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Perfect Zen koan. Yeah. I think so much method is in helping us with that overactive, what's called like lung or upward wind energy, thought energy. And Tsoknyi Rinpoche talks a lot in the first part of this book about how when first teaching in more modern contexts, as opposed to, in the cultures that he grew up in, that there's so much more mental activity. And so that's why he started with these heart practices, so that folks could be in the body, and then from being in the body in a loving way, kind of tolerate the onslaught of ongoing I-related thoughts. And so it's, it is like, it's interesting because it's great to have methods, but then we can also like over method, and it can like excite it a little. Like you think again of healing. I have a bum shoulder right now. It's kind of healing. And sometimes I do the exercises and I'm like, great, that's strengthening. And sometimes I do more method or exercises and I'm like, ooh, I agitated it. And so with our mind, like labeling can be very effective, but can also be like another thing. And so coming back to the body over and over without any technique, even though, yeah, those thoughts are going to keep coming. It's like giving ourselves just one anchor or one tether, I'd say, for practice. And this is unusual. Like usually we wouldn't do so many foundations of mindfulness in one, but my curiosity in having us see if we can feel the I in each one is kind of the point of this practice. And then throughout the day, boy, there are so many beautiful ways and techniques for us to recognize that we're caught up in a story. That could be kind of a reappraisal, like, is this actually happening right now? Like, is this real right now, right? It could also really, just be taking in something bigger, like quite literally widening the frame through the visual field can often bring us out of that narrow kind of identification. And then hand on heart, feeling sensations. And there's so many techniques, and I would say feeling into one that is natural and then making it like super reliable. And then trying another and like feeling into that one and then making that one reliable and getting like your whole kind of toolkit or toy box or whatever you want to think of it as. Because there's many methods. The methods are super helpful. But I think what we'll get into tonight is we also really need to work on the view and like this underlying idea of sense of self. We're going to have all the tools we can, but until we start to really kind of live into an idea that we are loving awareness, as opposed to the thoughts and identifications, it'll be an ongoing kind of act, react, as opposed to that bigger loosening. So, thank you. And your name again? Elizabeth, thanks. Any other? Yes, hi, Nick. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. I'm just sort of curious. I had, definitely dialing into sort of, what was happening physically in the body. And for me, my heart was palpitating. And I was like, what could it be from? And it probably definitely was from like 10 Reese's peanut butter cups that I had earlier today.
Jealous.
So like, which I don't love. Like that sometimes like I get like late, like sort of later in the afternoon, I hit like a low energy point. Like I need energy, sugar.
Yeah.
Just go right into it. And so, I was sort of listening and trying to follow your guidance in terms of, okay, well, just it is what it is, sort of, not sort of assigning too much judgment to it. Mm-hmm. But I was like, well, I know this is not good for me. Like this is my body adversely reacting to something that's not a good habit.
Yeah.
And, in the short term, it's fine. But like, over days and months and years, like this is not a good habit.
Yeah.
And so I guess how I tried to sort of receive that was that don't judge the judging.
Yeah.
Like acknowledge that this is not a good, healthy response to my body, but then just sort of approach that from curiosity. I'm wondering, is that sort of, does that sound like a right approach or a helpful?
Yeah. I mean, we inadvertently can slide into what's called like inquiry practice, right? So you're noticing what's happening and you're like, this is not good. So there's that almost like that clear seeing that's arising through, stilling and calming. And I think that's wonderful, but we can like put it aside during the practice because it can populate its whole own thought train. Like, why do I even do this? Well, that's how I saw my parents do. That's how they did it. And they're the ones who told me to do so well. And that, like we can get into a whole kind of configuration around it. So if we can kind of see it clearly, let it be almost like a lightning strike, like, oh, no. Because it's beautiful to have insight into what serves us and doesn't serve us. Like practice can really give us that, right? We can get these just incredible insights because we have that level of stillness going on. It is interesting though, I went to the Contemplative Science Research Conference last week for 48 hours. It was very exciting. And some of my favorite researchers there are interoception researchers or people who studied embodied emotional awareness. And hi. Friends at home, if you can't see, I just experienced pure metta. No. It's good intervention. And a lot of the researchers there, one of the tests they try to give to people to measure interoception or embodied awareness is heartbeat detection. And I actually had a good conversation with someone because on longer retreat, I don't know if anyone else has had this, I start to hear my heartbeat in my ears. And you're like, am I dying? And I don't think it's true. It's like a funny, I don't know, again, I don't think it's been studied explicitly, but just that calming and that quieting, you can actually start to feel bodily signals. So this may indeed be Reese's peanut butter cup fueled, or it could also be that process of calming and settling too. Yeah, and just that same thing of can we be kind as we are noticing this at the same time? Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, friends at home, anyone? Hi? Okay. I like the waves. Okay, well, for those of you who haven't been here before, just a minor note. This is such an excellent book. As those of you who've been here know, on my way here I spilled tea. It's the first time, so it's a very tea-blessed book, but usually doesn't look quite so messed up. And this teacher, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, is, a beautiful lineage holder. He's actually describing throughout the book a bit of the culture from which these teachings arise from in a very accessible way. So he's a identified reincarnation of another prior teacher, which he says you don't need to believe in for this book, but giving us that cultural context. So Rinpoche is an honorific term. That's someone who is coming back and identified at an early age, of capable of receiving certain types of teachings to then give them to others, not just folks like us, but to kind of continue the lineage, teacher to student and teacher to student. And Tsoknyi, this book is a very simple and I think very elegant way of looking at some of the core philosophical approaches to Buddhism. And so let's see here. Going back to these versions of I, just one more moment on this, like mere as an M-E-R-E, that word is a little unfamiliar. You don't hear it that often, but this idea of like a mere I, it's very beautiful. He says in Tibetan, the term is dak, and it's, just a mere sense of I. This idea of a mere I is actually something that we can almost aspire to. He says when we are thinking about the level of ourself and a mere I, there's not a lot of grasping. He said the very lightness of the mere I leaves a lot of space for essence, love, and openness to flow. So when we're not so identified with trying to become or who we are or how we're seen, there's a lot more of this natural openness. And then he says this often is viewed in, people who are in the very first months and years of their life, and that actually has such a presence of warmth, right? This mere I, there's so much kind of natural love there. And then, and then things start to happen and we start to identify with our bodies and building this solid sense of self in order to kind of cope with the reality of change all around us. So we are growing and things are happening and shifting. We're trying to understand who am I in relation to the world, and we start to try to place ourselves. This is natural, this is not pathological, but sometimes we, I guess, overdo it. So this solid I, he says, the solid I is pretty much identified with our bodies, but as we mature, the solid I becomes more abstract or conceptual. It evolves into a separate self, a separateness located vaguely outside of our bodies or in our imagination. As we apply tighter, harder labels to our experience, our thoughts, our emotions, our physical sensations develop a weighty thing-like quality. We begin to identify with the thoughts and feelings as dimensions of experiences that are inherently part of us. And again, not necessarily such a huge problem to feel like our sensations are ours, our thoughts are ours, but what kind of slowly seeps in is these are mine and they're different from yours. My experiences are separate from yours. So the solid I is really problematic because of the way it separates us, as opposed to there being a problem with having a sense of, this physical body. And that slides into this sense of the precious I. And I really thought it was meaningful, this way he describes the precious I, or self-cherishing I, is almost like an addictive I. That aspect of ourself that becomes attached to and feels the need for something beyond the basic spark of warmth. So this, this way that we kind of look out there for something to feel good in here, often at the consequence of missing that which is always already good in here. So that self-cherishing I. And again, the more that we're looking out there for that approval, for that connection, for that warmth, for that affirmation, we're not seeing people as clearly. The empathy and compassion is also blocked. We're like, I need you to make me feel good, right? So that starts to kind of build up this armor within us. And he then goes on to describe that we need an I. I like what he says here about what he calls the useful I. He says, a lot of people think Buddhism promotes the idea of extinguishing the I, or the self, or the ego. But the idea of extinguishing ego or self is inaccurate. You may as well try to extinguish your feet or your hands, right? They are useful. They help us to do things. But where we kind of get locked up is where we over-identify. So the useful I, so as I move through the world, as I'm here in front of you talking, I'm applying my understanding of myself, my knowledge, my wisdom, who I am, to share with you all. But then I can also dip back into that spacious loving awareness and also know that as myself. So it's almost, the useful I is a permeable I. There's not that kind of rigid, tight sense of self. And again, hopefully in that meditation, we can start to feel or sense that, wow, when I'm in that spacious, loving awareness, there's not the need to define who I am or be who I am. And it's so interesting because I love psychology. I'm a big fan. I'm a student. I'm a researcher. We have so many incredible constructs for I in psychology. And they're very nuanced, right? Everything from internal family systems where instead of one I, there are many sub-parts I, right, that are oriented towards protecting us and helping us and that rise up at different parts of our life and have different messages, and super fascinating to think of ourselves in that complexity. There's the whole approach of a kind of narrative I, that we are constantly creating a sense of self through the stories that, sometimes are drawn from our past, sometimes are drawn from our expectations or goals of who we want to be. So our sense of self is actually created through storytelling, the stories we tell ourselves and others. Super fascinating. Also lots of truth in there. There's these more kind of phenomenological or momentary understandings, especially from kind of neurocognitive understanding of self. So this idea of a minimal phenomenal self, just the basic experience of consciousness through senses, creating a sense of I, moment to moment. And that one gets closer to a Buddhist point of view, but in the psychological points of view, there's like a little bit of a, I wouldn't even say opposition, but there's a bit of a contrast in the releasing and the easing of sense of self that Buddhism points us towards. And then the thrust where psychology is often still oriented towards an I as separate, right, and enduring. And there are many, many wonderful Buddhist psychologists. They all teach at Spirit Rock. And we've done a great deal to merge contemporary psychological understanding with Buddhist philosophy. And I think it's, it's interesting to feel that kind of contrast, if not that rub of those two different approaches. And one of the ways Tsoknyi Rinpoche starts talking about this is in this method. How do we start thinking about our experience that can allow us to loosen that sense of attachment to a separate self? So he talks about leaving the monastery. He was, grew up for most of his early teens and latency years in a monastery and getting extensive training. He has this moment where he realizes it doesn't feel like a good fit for him and decides he's going to be a teacher, just what's called like a lay teacher or someone who's not in robes. And in his first year of being a lay teacher outside the monastery, he gets really excited about Coca-Cola and rice and gains like a ton of weight and goes back to the monastery and they're like, oh my God, you've grown, but not in the right ways. And he's like, oh my gosh. And he said it was no problem to give up rice, but it took him 7 years to give up Coca-Cola. And he was like, I had become so identified with my happiness with Coca-Cola that it was like, it took some reprogramming. And I love that humor and humility that he brings. And he says, it's fortunately, the Buddha and the great teachers who followed in his footsteps proposed a variety of methods to deal with the particular challenge of giving up who you think you really are. and just he was able to give up Coca-Cola because he was like, this isn't good for me. But giving up who we think we are. And again, not because having a sense of self is so bad or wrong by nature, but often we just get so hooked on it. It gets so solid. It gets so, so much of our misery and dissatisfaction is not living up to some idea of how we think it should be. And then projecting that onto others, and someone else not living up to an idea of who we think they are. And so these constructs, we're not breaking them down so we can be great Buddhists. We're like breaking them down to be more free, to feel that fluidity, that warmth, openness. So I'll say this again, I read it at the beginning, but I love this idea that mindfulness is designed to assist us in uncovering or unfreezing these various layers of I that prevent us from experiencing the basic spark that lies at the heart of our being. And he then talks about, meeting a teacher that really changed his understanding. And some of you may be familiar with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was a great teacher of this last century. And one of the lines that he heard from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche that stuck with him, that helped him really get curious about the mind, was, "That which seeks the mind is the mind." In the simplest terms possible, what we call the mind is not a thing, but a perpetually moving event, operating on different but related levels. One level, or normal everyday awareness, focuses on the type of relative experience we have when driving cars, managing relationships with partners, spouses, children, coworkers, etc. This relative awareness, or relative mind, tends to run around in circles. The other, more expansive level of awareness is a fundamental openness or clarity. And so this idea that the mind isn't the stable thing, this idea that the mind, that which seeks the mind is the mind. And this process of our life experience is mind. It's just a subtle shift. It's like, it's kind of obvious, like, oh yeah, like mind isn't fixed, it's moving. But even that, as like a pointing out, can be so confronting in a good way. And this idea, this really important idea of what's called relative reality, right? So what we are mostly moving through and in, and sometimes relative reality is great. Like, I just got a pretty sweet set of gifts from two people in this room, both of which I can eat. Relative reality is working for me, right? But then relative reality isn't working in other ways of our life at all times. And this idea that so much of the content of relative reality, the thoughts, the ideas, the projections, both of who we are, who others are, how the world is working, is this circle, right? This samsaric circle of kind of moving around. And we have to attend to relative reality. Like, someone's got to pay the bills and take out the trash. However, if that's our only plane of being, our existence will be more full of suffering than if we have access to this other plane of reality and existence, which is spacious, open awareness. So that's, again, it's not like, let's get rid of relative reality and exist in the transcendent state. I think they tried that in some 70s cult, and it didn't really work, and there's relationship issues, and so we don't want to like go out there to experience something better. We want to kind of bring, heaven down to earth. Like, find that sense of spacious, open awareness and have it permeate relative reality. And I want to, there's quite a bit in these next two aspects here, but I want to give us one piece. So many of you are familiar with the kind of 8 types of consciousness. So this is, again, pretty core Buddhist teaching. So we have our sense consciousness, which are the first 5. So the I consciousness, right? And this idea, like, just to take a pause, the scientists that are Buddhist thinkers, Buddhist philosophers, and Buddhist practitioners, These are incredible scientists of mind, so curious about the nuanced functioning of mind. So using meditation as a laboratory to really unpack, what is awareness? Like, what are the layers and levels of, how am I even aware? Like, what is coming in through all of my senses that's creating awareness? And then what's happening after? And it's just, I always find it kind of so inspiring. You know, we so default now to like reading a study or knowing that people study this through science, but to just do the first person, the true contemplative science, right? Studying our own minds. And through that process, these kind of 8 pathways or types of consciousness. So there's the consciousness that comes from seeing, right? Everything that we can see through forms, hearing consciousness, smelling consciousness, so really disentangling all the forms of data and information that give us a sense of ourselves and the world, nose, tongue, and then sensations in the body. And then it starts to get really interesting, the 6th, 7th, and 8th form of consciousness. So the 6th consciousness, it's easy to think of this as a receiver of information, like a telephone operator. It doesn't judge or interpret the messages. It functions to tell the conscious mind something is happening. There is sound, there is sight, right? So not just that those signals are coming in, but that simple, bare recognition of sensory information. And then we get into the 7th aspect, which is the interpretation. And Tsoknyi describes this, there's like I would say millions of commentaries on this very aspect of consciousness. But he describes it as the 7th consciousness is shaped by social, cultural, and personal influences in a similar fashion to the way in which we modify computer programs and adopt or reject options available. So he's talking about social networking sites, like we, you know, immediately see and want or don't want, and those wanting and not wanting is informed by culture, family, things we've learned in the past. And those of you in the room who've attended some of the Cultivating Emotional Balance training, when we look at a model of emotion, the 7th consciousness is what's called automatic appraisal. So not just what's happening, the sound or the smell, but then how we categorize. Right? How do we categorize based on past experiences, based on what we've learned and influences? And then there's the 8th consciousness, which really relates to that. It's called the storehouse consciousness. And it's where the imprints from early in our life, and in this case, from other lifetimes. So he says, this kind of storehouse of all the patterns and all the programs ever installed on our living system. A complete record of all modifications we've made under societal or personal pressure. The 8th consciousness stores every aspect of our experience, every idea and emotional pattern. It's kind of, he says, it's kind of like a hard drive. It's funny that he's using the computer metaphor, but I think he wants to be relatable. And I think this idea of recognizing, you know, just at that simplest level, that our awareness is mediated. So of course we're receiving all this information through all the senses. We're categorizing it. We're kind of doing the pattern recognition. And then, you know, we're also drawing upon this storehouse or all of these patterns. And this is why our sense of who we are in any given moment, it's almost like a history book. It shows us what we've lived before, right? Like how we're reacting to this moment is a very often easy way to help us understand what we've experienced in the past. And there is still, needless to say, opportunities for change and transformation. It's not like the very way that we act now is exactly how we've been treated or what's happened to us. It's how we've interpreted, how we've changed, how we've grown. But it certainly is quite different person to person, which is why we aren't all the same person wanting the same thing at the same time. That'd be convenient, but that's not how it is, right? So this unique, you know, kind of this unique embodiment has absorbed different messages and materials and stories. And the process of meditation helps us see through the layers of that story so that we can experience something more fundamental, something at that base level of love and warmth together. And, even if, that might sound a little idealistic, I hope just the kind of simple, the poetry of it. Like, wow, there's a possibility of living more free from these imprints of the past that actually aren't quite accurate and that actually create obstacles and blockages. Just that possibility. And that we can, start to recognize and really see these levels and layers within us. And this is why, I really do love the CEB program and protocol of taking one emotional experience and being able to trace back all these constituent factors. So in Buddhism, we call it causes and conditions. So let's see if I can think of a good one. I rode an e-bike here, and I feel a lot of shame around that because I'm a regular bike rider, but because of my shoulder injury, it's like hard to do it, right? And so on my way here, there was a regular bike rider who was in the same bike lane and who was pretty much going the same amount of time as I was on the way here. Like they were tracked with me. And I felt, I could have felt many things, but because of my current and past experiences, I was frustrated by them. I wanted, at least if I'm on this e-bike, I should be faster than this person, right? And they were just getting on their way. But all of a sudden, when they came into my life, in my view, I imposed all this, well, if I was on a bike, I'd also be as fast as them. They probably are judging me, but I'm gonna judge, just all this like material, right? And like, oh, this injury, and it's been so much longer, and I hate the physical therapy person at Kaiser, they're not good. Like, there's just, like we could go on and on in these personal stories and projections that really, they show us a lot. It wasn't that bad, I swear, but it's just interesting how our material, right, that's just right beneath the surface, it has nothing to do with, I'm in a bike lane with another person. Like simple, basic reality. Like there's no danger, there's no harm, it's actually just fine. But so much of our, right, personal material, our projection, it can get in the way of seeing reality as it is. And that's why you hear this Buddhist kind of refrain, one of the goals of practice is see reality as it is. And you're like, that sounds boring. Why? That's not an exciting goal. It's like, it's really exciting to see reality as it is, free from that projection, free from delusion, free from craving, free from greed. You're just seeing it. And what's so cool is that basic seeing allows that space for the warmth and the love, and everything's pretty beautiful. Like we don't have to need to make it better. Like it's like, wow. So I was mentioning, this time with my dad as he's transitioning to not being in this world with us, and that slowed down time. And my, coming in with all my things to do, things I've done, and I'm just like, wow, this is so beautiful. And like he's loving just being with breath, right? Like there's no getting out of this room for him, right? And yet he can still, is like, are you enjoying your experience right now of being alive? And he says, yeah. So it's really, our last session, we did these practices on impermanence as a ways to help shake up that sense of I. And whatever means necessary, like paying close attention to our reactions and reactivity, and like softening, like can we experience things as they are? Can we loosen some of those layers? We don't have to do an elaborate retreat or practice. It's bringing that mindfulness, that attention, that awareness to what's happening, right? That's peeling back the layers. Like we will continue to go through these beautiful concepts and constructs and maps that Tsoknyi's offering, but it's a very simple practice, this kind of releasing ourselves from the confines, just kind of refreshing over and over being right here as we are with what's happening and noticing if it feels available, that greater spacious awareness. So with that, let's remind ourselves of the bigger picture of what and how we do this practice for. So coming back to the breath in the body, and softening again through the face and the chest and the belly. And seeing if we can notice any sense of spark, warmth that's already here. And if it feels comfortable, placing the hands together in front of the heart, a symbolic gesture of offering. And what we're offering is our energy, our time, our being here together. And we imagine that this energy and time and presence has momentum and has power. And we dedicate it to this outrageous possibility that all beings everywhere could experience a sense of love and belonging. That all beings everywhere could loosen the confines that separate them from themselves and one another. That all beings everywhere could be protected from inner and outer harms. That all beings everywhere could be free. Thank you so much for your practice. It's so sweet to be here with you. Such an anchor to be in practice and with the teachings and in community.